Louis Vuitton stands as the foremost luxury fashion brand globally, boasting unparalleled value. Its CEO, Bernard Arnault, ranks as the second wealthiest individual worldwide, amassing a staggering net worth of approximately $190 billion. Despite its current prosperity, it's scarcely imaginable that the company's origins trace back to a founder who experienced homelessness during adolescence, lacked formal education, and resorted to sleeping in a forest. Louis Vuitton epitomizes a classic rags-to-riches narrative. Yet, its trajectory wasn't devoid of challenges, including the specter of a hostile takeover, numerous legal battles, and a litany of controversies. This saga encapsulates the remarkable journey of Louis Vuitton, illustrating how a modest family enterprise burgeoned into one of the globe's most influential brands. Louis Vuitton was born in 1821 and spent his formative years toiling on his family's farm in Arnault, a remote village in France. Life in Arnault was rudimentary, lacking modern amenities such as electricity and running water. His father, Xavier, juggled roles as both a miller and farmer, while his mother, Corinne, supplemented their income by crafting hats. There is no evidence to suggest that Louis received any formal education. The nearest school was situated 6 miles away, rendering it impractical for him to attend. Instead, he dedicated himself entirely to farm work, likely without acquiring basic literacy skills. Days were spent laboring in the fields from sunrise to sundown, striving to provide sustenance for his family. The Vuitton family faced dire financial circumstances, placing young Louis in a position that seemed destined for perpetual hardship. Tragedy struck further when Louis's mother passed away when he was just 10 years old. His father swiftly remarried, but Louis found himself at odds with his new stepmother, who proved to be domineering and manipulative. Constant clashes ensued, prompting Louis to make a drastic decision at the tender age of 13. He fled from home under the cover of night, setting his sights on Paris without bidding farewell to his family. However, a formidable obstacle stood in Louis's path. Paris lay 225 miles away, and he possessed neither money nor provisions, so he was forced to walk along dirt roads. Most nights, he slept in the woods with an empty stomach and just a cloak to keep him warm. Every time he ran into a new village, he would do odd jobs in exchange for food or coins. However, there was never enough money left over for housing, so he continued to sleep in the woods or wherever he could find shelter for the night. Through these various odd jobs, Louis was able to pick up skills from craftsmen, and he learned how to work with metal, stone, fabric, and wood. This diverse repertoire of abilities would later prove pivotal in reshaping his destiny. Nonetheless, progress was agonizingly slow, and it took Louis 3 years to finally set foot in Paris. Upon reaching the bustling metropolis, Louis secured employment as an apprentice boxmaker and packer. His duties entailed crafting bespoke boxes tailored to client specifications and overseeing the meticulous packing and unpacking of their belongings in preparation for travel. This occupation afforded him the opportunity to mingle with the elite, as affluent patrons sought his expertise in crafting custom luggage for their journeys. Louis dedicated several years to honing his craft diligently, immersing himself in the intricacies of boxmaking and pouring his efforts into every task. His dedication bore fruit in 1851 when his exceptional craftsmanship caught the attention of none other than the Empress of France. Impressed by his meticulous work, she bestowed upon him the prestigious role of her personal boxmaker and packer. For many in his trade, such recognition would mark the pinnacle of their careers. Yet for Louis, it represented a remarkable ascent from a destitute teenager to a position of eminence in the service of royalty, an achievement of monumental proportions. But Louis Vuitton had an even bigger vision for his future. After getting married when he was 33, Louis used his savings to start his own business and opened up his own boxmaking workshop in Paris to begin selling his own products in the upper class. So once he launched his new line of luggage, it was immediately a huge success. He even created a Louis Vuitton catalog so that customers could look at products that he had available and have them made before sending it to their homes. Within 2 years of creating his new suitcases, they were considered an elegant and must-have accessory amongst the wealthy, as it became a status symbol. and the brand had become so popular that he was receiving orders from around the world. He even began receiving orders from royals as far away as Egypt. In 1859, Louis made enough profit to hire a team of craftsmen to help fulfill his orders. He opened a new workshop outside of Paris where he hired 20 employees. Around that time, more and more people were beginning to travel by train and boat, so the number of his potential customers increased exponentially. Traveling was no longer a hobby exclusive to the rich. People from all walks of life were now in need of high-quality luggage. It would seem as though Louis had made it and would go on to succeed for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, that was not the case. France was heading to war, and tragedy was about to strike once again for Louis Vuitton. In 1870, when Louis was 49 years old, the Franco-Prussian War broke out. Louis had to flee his home and live in a cramped shelter with thousands of others. Food supplies were extremely low, and he feared for his life. When Louis could finally return to his shop in 1871, everything was destroyed. Windows were smashed, equipment was stolen, and he had lost everything he worked so hard for. But instead of giving up, he decided to use his savings to rebuild the business, and vowed that it would be even better than it was before. With so many people displaced from the war, there were far more empty shops available for rent throughout the city. So Louis Vuitton took advantage of this by opening his new shop in a much more wealthy aristocratic location in Paris. It was perfect because it was right next to the railway station and the Grand Hotel, so travelers who needed new luggage didn't need to go far to find the Louis Vuitton store. By 1872, he came out with a brand new design luggage made of a beige canvas with stripes. This became incredibly popular, and people loved showing off the modern style. Many other brands tried to copy his style, but his bags were such ridiculously high quality that customers still preferred a true Louis Vuitton bag. For the next 20 years, Louis continued to work at this new shop in Paris until his death when he was 70 years old. But his legacy was able to live on through his son Georges, who took over the family business. Georges sought out to expand the brand globally, such as opening a popular store in London. At this point, Louis Vuitton luggage was so popular that many other box makers were beginning to make counterfeits. So in 1896, Georges Vuitton brought out the now iconic LV monogram to make it harder to copy. The LV were his father's initials, in honor of the man who started the brand. He also came up with the idea of adding a revolutionary new lock on the trunks that would make it impossible for thieves to pick them. By the year 1900, the company had 100 employees, and it continued to grow year after year. All of the employees were trained for a very long time in order to become expert box makers. Even to this day, Louis Vuitton employees train for 18 months to 2 years before they're trusted to make one of the products on their own. The company also began to expand into a whole new line of products because of another fashion icon, Coco Chanel. In 1925, she commissioned a small dome-shaped handbag. At first, this was a design that she personally came up with, and it was just for her. However, it would go on to be mass-produced, and it was given the name Alma. This was massively successful, so Louis Vuitton began to make more small leather bags like the Keepall, Speedy, and Noe. Before Louis Vuitton, handbags were often seen as quite inelegant and bulky, but the company played a big role in them being seen as much more fashionable. Georges Vuitton died in 1936, and the company was passed over to his son, Gaston Louis. However, Gaston took over the company at a very difficult time, because in just a few years, France was once again heading to war. During World War II, contracts were cancelled, and Gaston was forced to shut down the Louis Vuitton factory. Paris was under siege once again. The only way Gaston Vuitton could save the business was to collaborate with Nazi Germany. An author named Stephanie Bonvicini wrote a book called Louis Vuitton, a French saga. During her research of the company archives, she asked if she could see records from World War II. Almost immediately, the representatives from the company tried to avoid showing her the information. They claimed that all of the documents from 1930 to 1945 were destroyed in a fire. But after doing a lot of digging into other historic documents, Stephanie discovered that Louis Vuitton was able to open a glamorous ground-floor shopfront in the Hôtel du Parc throughout the Nazi regime, as they collaborated with them. Meanwhile, several other brands were forced to shut down because they had refused to cooperate with the Nazis. Clearly, the company was ashamed of this part of their history, but they would argue Gaston did what he needed to do in order for the company to survive. Other fashion designers, like Coco Chanel, also collaborated with the Nazis in order to make sure her business in Paris was not destroyed. If it were not for their choice to work with the enemy, their brands would likely no longer be around today. When Gaston passed away in 1970, his son-in-law Henri Racamier took over managing the Louis Vuitton brand, so we're now on to the fourth generation. But unlike his ancestors, Henri already had a lot of business experience from a company he'd run before, so when he took over Louis Vuitton, he was able to elevate the brand to a whole new level. Henri began making major changes to the Louis Vuitton brand in order to grow it from a family-owned company to the massive corporation that it is today. He switched Louis Vuitton's business model from wholesale to retail. By 1978, he expanded into many other countries, including Japan. Over the course of 6 years, and accounting for modern inflation, sales went from $20 million to $260 million. And so, in 1984, Henri decided to take the company public. Louis Vuitton sold out the 1 million shares, valued at $63.63 each. Henri took this momentum and influx of cash and began opening more stores all across the globe. By 1987, Louis Vuitton reached $1 billion in sales. It was far beyond what young Louis could have ever dreamed of when he first opened his store in Paris. Henri also decided that the company should combine with Moet Hennessy, a luxury drinks company which produced champagne and cognac. And together, they formed a new luxury conglomerate called LVMH. In theory, by joining together, it would allow them to pool resources and expand even faster. Unfortunately, after the merger, Henri didn't end up getting along well with the president of Moet Hennessy. So Henri asked a successful property developer he knew named Bernard Arnault to help him manage the situation. Unfortunately, inviting him in as an investor would backfire in a huge way. Bernard secretly bought 43% of the shares of Louis Vuitton and got support from the Moet and Hennessy families to gain more power in LVMH. Henri felt he'd been betrayed by the man he'd brought in to help him, and so took Bernard to court, demanding that he should no longer have the majority stake in Louis Vuitton. But the courts ultimately sided with Bernard. Henri was so angry about being backstabbed by his friend that he decided to quit working for Louis Vuitton completely. Now, for the first time in nearly 100 years, no one from the Vuitton family was involved with the brand. After all of this drama of Bernard's hostile takeover, sales of Louis Vuitton began to crash. Journalists were no longer covering the brand. For a while, it looked as though the company might fail. However, Bernard knew how to turn the fortune of the company around. Louis Vuitton was able to make a comeback when it began to collaborate with several fashion designers during its 100th anniversary collection. Big names like Vivienne Westwood and Isaac Mizrahi all created their own take on the iconic LV monogram logo. They created products that customers had never seen before, and people were once again trying to get their hands on a Louis Vuitton bag. Ultimately, Bernard's investment in Louis Vuitton paid off in a massive way. He is now the CEO of LVMH. In 2021, Forbes officially dubbed him the richest man in the world with a net worth of over $180 billion. Now, of course, as stock prices move, these rich list rankings change, but he's almost always in the top 5 richest people in the world. However, out of the wealthiest people like Bezos, Musk, Gates, Buffett, Bernard Arnault is definitely the least known as he prefers to stay out of the spotlight. What we do know is he has such a ruthless reputation in business. He is known as the Wolf in Cashmere, which is why today LVMH has over 70 different brands it owns, through all of the acquisitions and mergers Bernard has pulled off. This one company owns so many of the most luxurious brands in the world. And yet, it all started with a broke homeless teenager. In the modern world, Louis Vuitton continued to expand its brand with new, colorful styles that resonated with a younger audience. In 1997, Marc Jacobs became the creative director. He designed the first ready-to-wear line and also created the popular monogram Vernus line of handbags. Marc Jacobs also expanded LV into watches, jewelry, and sunglasses, although he eventually would move on from Louis Vuitton and come out with his own line of clothing and accessories. Of course, the company is not without its issues. Louis Vuitton has an entire team of lawyers searching for copyright infringement, and they don't hesitate to sue someone if they believe that they are copying the brand logo. They have even sued Google for search results and advertisements leading people to fake bags. Google won the case, though, arguing they can't control what their users put on the internet. Louis Vuitton have also gone on to collaborate with brands like Supreme, which expanded their demographic like never before. Believe it or not, though, Louis Vuitton actually sued Supreme for copying their logo, until they realized how profitable a collaboration would be. Now, Louis Vuitton Supreme items resell for a small fortune. For example, the leather trunk is on sale for $125,000, or even an LV Supreme hoodie is over $5,000. Of course, the counterfeiting problem Louis Vuitton had since the early days of the business is still an issue for the brand today. They estimate that every year they lose hundreds of millions of dollars to counterfeit versions of their products. However, even after being in business for 168 years, they don't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. Louis Vuitton continues to be a brand that many people aspire to wear, and it's a staple among the rich and famous. Currently, they are the #1 fashion brand in the entire world, valued at $39 billion. With more than 400 stores, you can find a Louis Vuitton in nearly every major city around the globe. But what do you think of Louis Vuitton? Do you think that it's overpriced by all of the hype, or do you feel that the quality of the products justifies the massive price tag?